I'll move over and you can.
Sit with us?
Yeah.
Much easier targets.
That's even better.
Congressman, it's up to you if you want to sit there or.
If this is okay, I can come up.
I'm fine. Thank you.
Why don't you just do it? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
And I can see it. Well, I see. Our video's on.
All right, well, this is a first. Okay. All right, well, welcome. And we will get this meeting started. I will call the meeting to order and then we will move from there. Supervisor. I was just going to say, Congressman Huffman, would you like to lead us in Pledge of Allegiance?
I would be honored.
That would be great.
Repeat after me. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Just a minor announcement. Supervisor Brown's unable to join us. He had a planned vacation and he sent some comments that he would like for me to read for all of you. Good afternoon, residents of Trinity County, members of the board, and Congressman Huffman. I regret not being able to present at this presentation, but hope I can offer some words of support and encouragement toward a fruitful meeting due to Madam Chair Morris' voice and willingness to share my statement in my absence. In my pledge to find and support solutions for economic opportunities, utilizing our natural resources, it is clear to me that this bill is a step forward, increasing the longevity and diversity of our local landscape for future generations of landowners, businesses, and visitors to Trinity County. It is my hope that through meetings like this and other future conversations, Congressman Huffman will continue to best represent the needs of Trinity County through his sponsorship of this bill. Supervisor Brown. So, all right. With that, we have only one item today, and I will say this is just quite a first. It's just amazing, and thank you so much for making the trip to go through your legislation. It's going to be very helpful for everyone involved, and I know it wasn't an easy trip to get up here, so thank you again. Moving on to 101 or 1.1, receive a presentation from Congressman Jared Huffman regarding H.R. 2250, Northwest California Wilderness Recreation and Working Forest Act. No fiscal impact. With that, I will turn the floor over to you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Is there a special trick to activate the microphone?
It's on. You're live.
Is it on? Am I live? Can you hear me, folks?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Madam Chair, thank you. It's actually a great honor for me to be here. I'm sorry that Supervisor Brown is on vacation, but I'm grateful that I guess I get this empty seat to fill, and that way I get to look at this good-looking audience while I chat with you and we do a deep dive on H.R. 2250. That's kind of the premise of this gathering today. And I want to thank you, too, because I know that the board has taken this up a couple of times in the past, and the last time you took it up, I asked you to give us some time to have a conversation like this so that we could be as fully informed as possible so that I could have the benefit of another round of input. That's important to me, and I appreciate the courtesy of you allowing me to do that. Also appreciate that Supervisor Groves and Supervisor Brown made the trip all the way to Washington a couple of weeks ago when there was a legislative hearing on the bill. I see Kent Collard in the audience today from the Bar 717 Ranch. He was also a witness at that hearing. We had a good, productive conversation about the bill back in Washington, and I had a good opportunity to have yet another separate conversation with Supervisors Brown and Groves. So what I want you to know before we dive into the specifics of the bill is I've now been your congressman for 7 years. The idea of doing a big public lands bill came to me pretty early, not long at all after I was elected. And I was very clear early on that as interested as I am in wilderness and wild and scenic rivers, I wanted to do more than just designate new wilderness and new wild and scenic rivers. I wanted to look creatively at the opportunities for economic development, for forest treatment and fire resiliency in our public lands. I wanted to look creatively at everything, frankly, all aspects of how we manage our public lands. And I think what we have through literally many years of deliberation and what I hope has been an open and transparent process, to some it's been a painfully long process, but I hope we have a bill that captures that intent on my part to look comprehensively at our public lands and to manage them for multiple benefits. Certainly to conserve the incredible special places that I am honored to represent. And you here in Trinity County get to live in one of the most spectacular of them all. I think my entire great district is really special and unique, from the old growth redwoods and the Smith River area to the Mendocino National Forest and the many beautiful areas in Humboldt County and beyond. But here in Trinity County, you have a lot of spectacular public lands, a lot of really wonderful wilderness, and I know that many of you appreciate that can be an economic engine as well as just an important place to protect for future generations. So we've tried to do a lot of that in this bill, and one of the most important things we do is designate a 730,000 acre restoration area, special restoration area in the South Fork, Trinity, Mad, and North Fork Eel River watersheds. When we call this a restoration area, I want to be real clear. There will be a lot of active forest treatment in this area, and that is because this is an area that was cut over and replanted in a plantation-style framework that now is not very healthy forest and is certainly very vulnerable to catastrophic wildfire. So we think we can do better in this area, and it happens to be an area that really needs restoration because it's important to coho salmon and other anadromous fish that I know we value very much here on the North Coast. So we've designated this area to create an extensive network of shaded fuel breaks. It's the kind of projects we call for are precisely the kind that Supervisor Morris and others who've worked on the Trinity Collaborative have been developing and trying to move forward in other areas. So we think it makes a lot of sense. We think it'll create jobs, it'll create healthier forests, it'll contribute to restoration of these rivers and these fisheries. And we've done that by asking the Forest Service to the maximum extent practicable to use stewardship contracting. We've done that for a specific reason. One of the things that I began hearing as we held public workshops on this bill was some skepticism, frankly, that these projects were actually going to happen. And from my many meetings with the collaborative, I sort of know where that skepticism is coming from. It's frustrating, even when really good projects are developed that are supported by seemingly everyone. Sometimes they still don't happen because of lack of funding and because of other reasons. So a couple things about that. One, the Forest Service in recent years has been perpetually behind the game when it comes to fighting wildfires. They haven't had the funding in their budgets to fight these catastrophic fires, and so because we don't treat them like other natural disasters, so they've had to go digging through other parts of their budget to find the money, and that means the resources that we'd like them to use for proactive fuels treatment and other projects often just aren't there, and so a lot of things lag and don't happen. One of the few things we've been able to accomplish on a bipartisan basis and in the last couple of Congresses is to finally, after many years of complaining about it, fix this fire borrowing problem, as we call it. So starting in the next fiscal year, beginning October 1st, for the first time, certainly since I've been around, and I think going back quite a bit before that, the Forest Service will have the funding to do fire suppression without dipping into other parts of its budget, and that should help a lot as we try to move projects forward. But stewardship contracting also makes a lot of sense because it aligns with the type of work we want to do in this restoration area, and because we can have confidence that these projects are brought together through a collaborative process. It opens up the possibility for environmental streamlining, and our bill calls for that environmental streamlining, precisely because of that skepticism I heard from a lot of folks. They didn't think projects would actually happen. So we've done as much as we can in this bill to make sure the projects do happen. And this is pretty ambitious. We're talking about 733,000 acres of a special restoration area where we are focused on these type of projects. There's a lot more than that in this bill, and a lot more that I hope people in Trinity County and the board will be interested in. Everything from a new visitor center to a new trail around Trinity Lake, a process for doing broader trail studies, the designation of a trail that we think could be of national significance in terms of attracting people to this area, a loop trail that would go from Mendocino County, winding its way all the way up to Crescent City, that at least tentatively is being referred to as the Bigfoot Trail. We think that and frankly all of this combined is going to be a good thing for Trinity County. So I think rather than, Madam Chair, rather than go through all the elements of the bill, maybe we should just open it up to questions, and we can take whatever issues come up. I've got John Driscoll with me here, sitting down in front. John is really my technical expert and my go-to person. He's working out of my Eureka office, but he's very familiar with Trinity County and is here as a resource for me and for you to make sure anyone who came here with a question gets an answer. I'll just make one more commitment before I stop. I will answer to the best of my ability, but if you have questions that require us to go find you an answer, we'll follow up with a letter to the Board of Supervisors to make sure that absolutely any issue or question that gets raised today has a written response to you so that you can then make your deliberations and see what you think about this bill. Thank you very much. I yield back, as we say in Washington.
Thank you, Congressman. At first, I'd like to take any questions from the board members on some technical aspects of the bill. Does anyone?
Well, we submitted a list of questions. I assume after the public, Congressman mentioned.
Happy to go through?
You want him to go through now or after?
Well, why don't we hear from the, we're here to listen to the public and Congressman.
Okay, so I will read these questions first, and then we will open them up to the public to come to the podium for those who choose to do it that way. So, okay, this is more of a comment that he supports your legislation. This is a gentleman out of Junction City. A gentleman out of Weaverville, I guess, supportive of your legislation, no question to the bill. Okay, here is a question. The Chickaping Wilderness will surround our family property. We have an easement on Trail 8E18, Upper South Fork Trail, and we want to know that it will always have vehicle access to our cabin for future generations. We have 5 generations that live there and use the cabin, the water, electricity, phone, etc. Will a wilderness label change that? And then the third comment is 200-foot special treatment area includes our cabin, shed, orchard. What does that really mean? Do you want me to stop
Sure.
there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I
Definite
appreciate
other
it.
ones.
So any private property interests are grandfathered in. So there are private inholdings within some designated wilderness areas and some proposed study areas for wilderness. We've tried to be very clear in the bill that all rights of access and other private property rights will remain intact regardless of the designation. That goes to the Wild and Scenic River designation as well. Any place, any private property that is along a Wild and Scenic River designation will be unaffected in terms of property rights. And we've got very specific provisions in the bill to guarantee that.
Okay. Furthermore, he says we live on the Upper South Fork area with access up Trail 8E18. We and 5 other landowners have easements up behind a locked Forest Service gate, 2 locks for service. Will we always have access to the property behind a gate that is not for public travel?
Yeah, so just being even more specific on this issue, another piece of feedback I got the minute I started having this conversation in Trinity County was some concerns from your sheriff at the time and others about road closures by the Forest Service where the public was not consulted. So there is a process where roads can be proposed, identified for decommissioning. We have added to the public input aspect of that process to very specifically require that any trails or roads proposed for closure or decommissioning have to include extra layers of consultation. And they can't foreclose any private rights of access. So again, if you are using a trail or a road to access your property through federal land today, you will be able to do that in the future.
Okay. Our property was settled in 1908. Water rights, riparian rights, and mineral rights, U.S. Forest Service easement through our property. Will any of these be affected by this bill?
No. All existing mining claims, grazing permits, any other private property interest on federal land is grandfathered in and will continue. So we've gone through every section of the bill where this could be an issue and included very specific provisions to address that concern.
Okay, and then this last question statement. This is the first step. What is the end game in 50 years that my granddaughter and her children will have to deal with? Take all private property, make it impossible to access our own property.
Well, that is not something that we want. Let me just clarify one thing, because I think there is perhaps an assumption by some folks that this bill involves bringing new land into federal ownership. It does not. Every single acre that we're talking about in this bill is already federal land. It's already federal public land. We're talking about how it's managed. And in those sections where we propose new and different types of management, let's say the special restoration area where we're going to work on shaded fuel breaks, or the wilderness, or the wild and scenic river areas, we've been very clear to protect all existing property rights, including access through existing roads and trails.
Okay, that was,
What about properties that do not have access right now through Forest Service that will be wilderness that is private property? If they in the future request that a road be put in through wilderness to their private property. I have property near me that looks like it's in that situation, that it is private property, and I don't know whether they'll ever be able to have access, not that they necessarily should. I'm assuming the property is still private. It could have been deeded to a conservation or back to the government.
So Supervisor, we're happy to look at the specific parcel you're talking about, but it is true, new roads and trails are more complicated after there's a wilderness designation. That's kind of what wilderness is all about, is to prevent new development and disturbance of the land. But what I'd like to do is go over that specific parcel with you and see if you think that there's a reasonable foreseeability of a new road being required, and if so, we'll be happy to think that through with you. And look, I don't want to foreclose access to any private property. That is, we're trying to be very careful to make sure that that's simply not an issue. Thank you for your attention.
and just a little more clarification on those questions the gentleman asked. Of course, you have two sections of wilderness footprint, and then you have the 700,000 plus of restoration. Of course, none of that will be affected in the restoration either.
Same protection for existing access and existing property rights in both categories.
Okay, so now we will open up to question comments to the podium. You will have to come to the podium. Yep, 3 minutes. And John, I gather you'll help take the questions and we will follow up after comments are done. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Ryan Richards from Hayfork. When you designate areas wilderness, they become roadless areas. How do we fight fire effectively on all levels, large and small fires without roads? Get to them. The same question is for search and rescue. Taking out roads limits recreational access for most people, including seniors and families with kids. Wilderness areas eliminates grazing, which in southern Trinity is a major industry. Grazing helps keep brush down. We need more grazing, not less, for industry and fire safety. After big storms and landslides, creeks become blocked. How will scenic waterways be restored if often boulders come in and they're completely blocked? This has happened at all rivers and creeks. And so each removal, like this wilderness removal from where you can really access it, it is detrimental to our resources. In other words, because, for instance, when we log, or if we ever do log, I mean, the logging is so minimal here now, then that means we won't get those benefits from the logging. And when we did have logging and mining and lots of grazing, there are a lot of grazing everywhere here, we didn't have the big fires because we had a lot of people out in the forest that could get there and put the fires out. But once you take the roads out, you're limiting that. An example, too, of neglect here is we used to have 22 lookout towers. I think only one right now is manned 24/7. That's a big problem. And when we asked the Forest Service and the Collaborative, what would you like? They said they'd like lookout towers on every peak. And I think that needs to be built into here so that we can fight fires. And it's not just, but we just don't want you to just to dump fire retardant. We want to get to those small fires and put them out right away like we used to. And the other thing I want to bring up is that what is the question is, a big question, I don't know if you can answer right away, but the big question is, what is the real benefit for Trinity County? Because you're going to be taking away those resources, future resources, logging, what have you, mining, and so what is our benefit? There have been, I've heard a lot of complaints, by the way, that there's been no local meetings in the areas impacted, particularly for South Trinity. They haven't heard anything about it. They're stuck down there. It's 3 hours from here. You know, the ranchers and what have you have a hard time getting here. They really need to have you come down there and really tell them how it's going to impact their area. And this meeting, I don't know if you know, there was only notice, like a weekend notice. And so if you gave really efficient notice, you could have filled a room, I think, with 400 people, like when USDA Vilsack, when he came, we had like overfill. It was like 400 people that were really interested in addressing the issues of the forest. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Would you like me to respond now? Or?
Sure.
Okay. Well, so thanks for the question. So regarding the process, I wish that we had a lot more lead time for putting this on the books and making it happen. It is, let me just say, it's challenging to try to make my schedule align with the board's schedule, and we did the best we could. I'm glad to see such a good crowd here today. But this won't be the last meeting. I'll be happy to try to get to South Trinity. We've had a lot of public meetings, though. I do want to emphasize that. We've had hundreds and hundreds of people in these public meetings, and I've had smaller group meetings on many occasions. So I would venture to say there have been a lot of public lands bills, you know, over the decades. I can't imagine that there has ever been a bill that has received as much public and open, deliberative, transparent process as we've tried to provide in this bill, and we're not done. We're doing it today. So thank you for that. Now, you asked about the financial benefit to Trinity County because you assume that we are losing land that will generate revenue from mining and logging. Well, let's break this down a little bit. First of all, the land that we have designated, almost none of it is going to be mined or logged, and that's just the reality. To the extent that there are existing mining claims in any of these lands we're talking about, as I've said, and I'll continue to reiterate as much as necessary, those claims are preserved. So the likelihood of mining happening where there's been a claim that's staked, that it's valid, is not affected by this bill. In terms of the timber, a tiny fraction of the wilderness area we've proposed is even eligible for logging. And that logging hasn't happened in these areas in decades. I think 1989 was the last time we've seen logging anywhere near the vicinity of these proposed wilderness areas. The idea that we are foregoing, you know, great new revenues from logging in these very sensitive, pristine areas, I think is highly unlikely. In the special restoration area, there's going to be logging. We're proposing logging. It's going to be one of the tools used to move these projects forward, and we think there will be much more of it, frankly, than there would be without this bill. So if you take a look at that area we've proposed, 733,000 acres, in the last 10 years, only a tiny fraction of that has been harvested under the conventional process. So we think there will actually be a heck of a lot more activity in the forest under this bill, and you know what happens. That means that there's activity at the mill, it means there's jobs locally. So we think it's a positive story. But then you got to also add in all of the other benefits, the recreation benefits, the new visitors center, the new trails. I think in totality, this bill is a very positive economic contribution to Trinity County. That is the goal.
Okay. Carol, I think you were next.
Thank you for coming, and
Thanks
that
for
was the
having me.
perfect lead-in to my question, which is about the economic benefits. So my name is Carol Fall. I live in Trinity Center. I volunteer at the Trinity Center Visitor Center, and I can tell you that the type of recreation that we get, because we are the gateway to the Trinity Alps Wilderness, are people who want to know how to get to a trailhead in their Prius, how they can do a 1-hour hike in their flip-flops, how to access the lake, truly. I know it's not funny, but that's the current profile. And so I'm somewhat skeptical that expanding the size of the wilderness is going to increase recreational opportunities. The recreational opportunities right now are limited by lack of maintenance of the trails, the campgrounds, the access roads. So how do you compensate for that? How do you actually get those recreational benefits? So in return, I'm asking you specifically if you've considered land trades that might benefit the county, if you've considered instructing the Bureau of Reclamation to establish minimum carryover storage in Trinity Lake for cold water to benefit the salmon and recreation, because what we see is that people come to North Trinity for the lake, not so much anymore the wilderness. I know you can't provide funding in this bill, but where are we getting the funding for maintenance that encourages recreation? And those are the questions that I would have.
Absolutely, those are great questions. So thanks, Carol. So for the Prius flip-flop crowd that you described, it is true that they're different than the backcountry, trekker that would really get out and visit a lot of these more remote areas. But I think, again, some of the feedback that we've gotten, here on the ground has helped inform this bill. So the new trail around Trinity Lake, I think, would be potentially of great interest to the flip-flop Prius set. The new visitor center, I think, would be potentially of great interest. We will do a study, if this bill becomes law, that will be open to your input and other local stakeholders to try to make sure that we get the best ideas to take advantage of both that kind of recreation and the more...
There's no funding for that, it's only authorization.
Yeah, so that I'm going to get to that because you did raise the funding. And look, funding is a question with my bill or without my bill. We need more funding for recreation. We need more funding for forest treatment, for everything. It's one of the reasons that for the fuels management part of my bill, we went with stewardship contracting so we could create that funding engine. Okay. On the recreation side, one of the things we've done is authorize partnerships so that as we develop new trails and new facilities, those can be not just a check from Uncle Sam, but they could be a partnership with the state, with private nonprofit groups, with others. So we're going to have to work separately on getting all those dollars. It's going to be an ongoing challenge, but I commit to you that I will do my best to try to make that happen. Now, you mentioned water, and I'm fighting constantly to try to keep as much cold water in Trinity Lake and in the Trinity River as we can. But that's a separate track from this bill. I will fight that fight, whatever happens with this bill. And let me just say, this bill isn't the only things that we need to do for our public lands or for these natural resources in Trinity County and other parts of the North Coast. So I am happy to work with you and anyone else to maintain that cold water pool and protect the Trinity River. It's not in this bill because it's a little bit of a different issue, but don't take that to mean that it's not a huge priority of mine, because it is. Before I stop, the previous questioner had also brought up the issue of fire and wilderness, and I did not mean to pass that over, because I feel pretty good about the sections of this bill that try to bring better fire planning to our wilderness areas. Right now, it's fairly disjointed. Our federal agencies aren't talking to each other, aren't planning together. In fact, it was interesting at the hearing that Supervisor Groves attended and Supervisor Brown, there was a witness from the Forest Service who said, well, we like to do our planning separately. We do the land management plans over here, and then we do our fire plans over there. This bill is telling them you got to stop that. You got to bring it together. And that's again in part because I've heard that from you. This community and others in this district have told me that we've got to integrate fire planning with our land management plans. There's some institutional resistance to that at the fire service, but I think this bill puts us in a better place in terms of smart planning. And of course, the other thing we've emphasized in this bill is in the wilderness area, you can still fight fire. You can even fight fire using heavy equipment. So there are some misconceptions about what wilderness means when it comes to fighting fire. And we've tried to spell out and maybe demystify some of that a little bit in the four corners of this bill. So thank you for your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Next.
Hello, I'm Fern Zucchini from Hayfork,
Hi.
and I am a small miner. And my question is for future generations of miners who would like to file a mining claim in these areas. You can't file a mining claim in a wilderness area, as far as I'm aware. You know, it's not just me, and in fact, it may be me, because
Right.
I'm pretty young, I'm still here, I'm still filing claims. Why would you make more wilderness? What specific reason did you decide to put more wilderness into Trinity County? What is the benefit of adding more wilderness?
Okay. Well, thanks for your question. Look, these wilderness areas that are designated or proposed for study were pretty exhaustively examined, and there has been a long public process behind that. So they weren't random. They're chosen because of their very unique ecological values, and the concept of wilderness protection reflects the fact that we think there are some places that just need to be protected against different types of human disturbance. So realize not everybody likes that policy, but a lot of people do, and a lot of people actually will travel long distances to see and experience those wilderness areas too. So there are economic trade-offs that kind of go along with that. With respect to mining claims specifically, these wilderness areas, the new wilderness areas in my bill, have been available for mining claims to be asserted for way over a century. There has been a fairly aggressive staking of claims in this part of California over those many, many decades. If a claim was staked, it is respected and protected in my bill. If it hasn't been staked, odds are there's probably not a heck of a lot up there to mine in the first place. So I don't think it is the case that we are giving up on a whole bunch of mining activity that would take place in these lands. I think that's just highly unlikely.
If I may rebut?
Sure.
Rebut?
Oh,
May I?
you know, can we wait till we're done and anyone has follow-up questions?
course.
That way we can.
Through the chair, I'm sure. I'm not in charge here.
You're not. I just didn't want to get all over the place.
Good afternoon, Board and Congressman Huffman. I thank you for coming. I appreciate this opportunity to speak to you directly. I had a statement I was going to make, but I think this is a great forum to be able to ask you questions. So you mentioned, and my concern is the restoration area and the fire resilient forestry. That's what I've been focused on for 10 years at least, more than that. You talk about bringing the stewardship agreement to the restoration area. Are you familiar with the West Side Plantation Stewardship Project that's on South Fork Mountain, and they harvest about 5,000 acres a year, commercial and service work thinning. And so that's a tool that's already being implemented.
It is.
And the collaborative now is working on a countywide master stewardship agreement that would put any projects within the county under a stewardship agreement. And so those things are already tools that we have at our disposal and are utilizing them. And so how is your stewardship program better than what we already have today?
Well,
And I have other
yeah,
questions.
sure. No, thanks for the question. I think it complements those efforts. It recognizes that stewardship contracting for the type of projects many people want to see in Trinity County is just a great way to do them.
I agree. And but I just see that this bill isn't giving us anything new for that.
Well,
And
what
that
it
is
gives you
that.
that you don't have right now is a pretty strong statement by way of an act of Congress that this must happen and it must be prioritized. And it also will enjoy the benefits of environmental streamlining under the Healthy Forest Act. That's actually legislated in this bill. So I think there are several additional things you gain in this restoration area that you wouldn't necessarily have. Some of this work probably would happen, you're right, and it might well happen under a stewardship contract, but this directs that it must happen essentially, or comes as close to saying it must happen as I can with an act of Congress. There are some complicated House rules that limit me from actually using the word shall in certain circumstances, because then it triggers budgetary problems for the bill that I probably don't need to bore you with.
And so that brings me to a must-have through prioritizations. A point of order about your maps, has a picture or designates the plantations within a restoration area, and I wonder if that's all the plantations that are there, or is that just the plantations that you are prioritizing to work on? Because the prioritization is on roads that are access to the public, but there's a lot of roads that have been closed that have plantations on them.
Yeah.
And so your bill doesn't address those specifically like you do on the roads that are accessible.
Yeah. Well, you're right, and roadside areas certainly have the highest priority, but the bill does not say that you can't go into other areas.
It prioritizes specific projects.
No, you're right. No, the roadside it does have the highest priority. It's true.
And
Now, I believe it also talks about areas that are adjacent to plantation.
a buffer zone around the plantation.
Yeah.
Right, that's something that we already have here and we are doing. And that brings me up to the idea that you need to prioritize that from Washington when we have a mechanism here through the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. We have fire state councils, we have collaborative groups, and where you have local people working with fire and fuel management specialists to help prioritize what projects should be done. But this bill is pushing that to the side and prioritizing roadside shaded fuel breaks.
Well, look, this bill, I think, is complementary to those other, within this restoration area, I suspect that the type of stewardship projects that are being developed locally are precisely the ones that are going to get funded. And in terms of other things we do to try to make sure that happens, that you don't have under current law, you don't have the prioritized consultation with the resource agencies under the Endangered Species Act. We provide that. So I think there's some features of this that actually increase the likelihood of more projects happening and happening faster.
Well, so I would just like to ask that
Larry, your time's right now, so.
to reduce that question is to eliminate the prioritization of roadside shaded fuel breaks and allow the community wildfire protection plans and local and fire state council develop prioritizations, and to allow fire planning, not just in the wilderness, but we need it everywhere in our forests.
Sure.
And by prioritization of projects, you're kind of pulling that plug out.
So Larry, let me just end, if I could, by saying that let's keep talking about this. It is by no means my intent to contradict or differ with these projects that are being developed locally. I want to actually complement them.
Okay, next. Thank you, Larry.
Hi, my name's Gail Goodyear, and I'm from the whole county. I've asked that the proposed legislation be segmented into separate bills. I believe it's too big. There's non-contiguous parts, and there's lack of funding for many proposed parts. I'd like to reinforce what Carol Falls said about Trinity Lake, Trinity Dam, and the Trinity Alps Wilderness area. The Whiskeytown National Park Service has put together the Whiskeytown Nugget. It tells what you can do in the next 5 minutes, 20 minutes, day, what you can do. the people who staff their information center, when asked, what can we do at Trinity Lake, say nothing.
What
And
do
I
we do by
wouldn't-
way of recreation, you mean, or?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And we have not realized any economic benefit of a substantial measurable amount from the Trinity Alps wilderness area. And there's different data that could be given for that. So I say funding first for Trinity Lake. It would be wonderful for visitors to be able to see our Trinity Alps. Ask someone to give you a ride to the top of Weaver Valley. Visitors who come to Weaverville, where's the closest place I can go to see it would be the Lookout. It's a rough road, take the ride. My deepest concern for Trinity County that I believe needs your full attention is the fire-killed dead standing timber in Trinity County. We have over 2 million acres of land in Trinity County, 3,200 about square miles. At least 15% of our county has fire-killed dead standing timber. That's about 300,000 acres. Last month, when the U.S. Forest Service District Ranger came, he said that 24,000 acres have received attention from the U.S. Forest Service in the last 5 years. Some of that attention was paperwork, not physical work. At a recent California Forest Landowners meeting, the fire management officer for the Carr Fire spoke, and he said that a major contributor to the fire tornado was the intensity of fire burning through dead standing timber and brush of a former burn. The 2008 Whiskeytown fire did not have dead standing timber and brush removed. The heat and weather created when it caught fire again in 2008 did not need to happen had the dead timber and brush been removed and reforested. I would like to share with you that the Whiskeytown fire in 2008 was 6,420 acres. And the Carr fire was 229,651 acres. So that fire management officer said when the dead standing timber is not removed, that then the next fire footprint will increase exponentially. So by my calculation, the multiple was by 35. Should the 300,000 acres here be multiplied by 35, that would be 10 million acres. So we're only 2 million. That means please take care of that first.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
I just want to say something. Hello. I don't actually have a question.
Your name, please?
My name is Carrie Sellers, and I became a resident in Trinity County in 2015. We purchased the historic homestead Deer Lick Springs, which is 100+ acres historic land cut into the Chantalula Wilderness. And I've had the privilege of living in the wilderness for the last 5 years, year-round. And I just wanted to say that us in Trinity County have got the messages. I was here in Weaverville at the Trinity High School to hear you speak on the bill. And Cal Wild's right here behind me, and they've been letting us all know. I also just wanted to address the minor questions about the timber. The 5 of the 6 historic homesteads on North Mountain were bought by the logging company this year. So sadly, that land is not being valued, and I'd like to see that land be valued, maybe some biking trails. There is a public and national forest campground at our location with 13 campsites that essentially sit empty. And we're doing our best to try to clean up our land and create an ecotourism destination there. And there is a lot of opportunity here in Trinity. I just wanted to address the question that the miner had about the wilderness area. Why do we need more wilderness? In the wilderness, there are several species, what we call indicator species animals, such as goshawks, Pacific fishers, golden eagles, flying squirrels, pileated woodpeckers, the American dipper, America's only truly aquatic songbird. There are so many independent species. The flying squirrel, for example, likes to eat Northern American truffles, which only grow in about 12 places in the world. So Huffman's plan for expansion of these wilderness areas are just small areas that are really difficult to get to and already not roadless areas. So after they're logged and people are able to put in roads, then there's, lookout spots like this lady mentioned, which I know if I go there, there's going to be a ton of trash. There's going to be noise, and you're not going to see any pileated woodpeckers. You're not going to see any flying squirrels. So I just wanted to say that's why we need more wilderness area.
Thank you.
I'm Joseph Bauer. I want to thank you for coming, and I want to tell you I support every part of your bill. I think it's a great idea, and it will be a big benefit to Trinity County. I'd like to use my time to put a little light on the shaded fuel break issue. Many years ago, we had an organization called the Bioregion here. It was put together by the Secretary of State in California. Our then Supervisor Arnold Whitridge rounded up quite a bunch of people, and we started talking about, well, how do we manage this forest? And we would invite hydrologists and geologists, and one time we invited Carl Skinner and Phil Witherspoon, two fire researchers from Pacific Southwest Research, to come in and talk to us about the fuels problem. And we asked Carl, who, by the way, I recently encountered in a restaurant in Red Bluff, and he was very happy to hear that we had finally taken his ideas and put them to work. Carl told us, we asked him, where do we start on such an immense problem? We got endangered species, we have all these watershed problems to deal with. Where do we start? Carl told us, well, you have to divide this forest into a lot of polygons that are protected by shaded fuel breaks. And it took us 25 years to get around to start doing that, but we're doing it now through the collaborative, not only doing the shaded fuel breaks that Carl suggested, but we're also thinning all the plantations along the roads. There are many plantations in this county that are way too steep to ever think about there's any economic ability to thin those. We're going to have to write them off. But the ones that we can reach, we can treat with ground-based equipment. We're going to thin those because we have 140,000 acres of old clear cuts that were turned into tree farms, almost none of them treated until very recently. So thanks again for coming, and thanks again for putting this bill together.
Good morning, afternoon, Jacqueline J. Wagner. Thank you for coming. Thank you all, supervisors. My statement is just listening and asking a couple questions. First, I feel that this bill will limit our ability to take our children into the wilderness past locked gates. Now at this point, this is one of the reasons why we raise our children here, is to be able to enjoy everything that we have and share that respectfully. Everything in moderation, whether it be mining and logging and traveling and, appreciating what we have. I feel like this bill will, if it does pass, after that, there's a lot more that seems very generic, and looking at the past, what we have had pass already, there's a lot that has been neglected, and that there's a lot that could generate a lot of income, the wilderness area and the Alps
for example. And I would like to see a lot more, as some other people would, first of how it would benefit and not just protect, but also how we who live here can continue to share this amazing place with our kids. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So could I ask you, do you mind, Cheslin, is there something specific about the bill that makes you worry that access to wilderness areas would actually be lost? Because we've certainly heard that concern. And I've tried to build provisions into the bill to make it very clear that there won't be any trails or roads. Existing trails and roads will stay. We've been very clear saying there should be no loss of access. But if there's something specific that is continuing to cause the worry, I commit to working on it. If it's just sort of a general concern that wilderness leads to a reduction in access, I guess that's an issue with or without my bill, but I'm doing everything I can to make access is one of the reasons I want to do this stuff, because I think that access is part of the economic upside for Trinity County on the recreation benefits. So I think I agree with your desire to protect it. I think we're doing it. If there's other things we can do to make that more clear, I'm very open to that.
Nothing specific, except for the gut instinct that less control that we have here is less control that we have here. And with good supervisors, you know, it would just take a lot more away from what we have when what we've already designated as wilderness area is in need right now without giving more.
I hear you. The other point you raised was about money and funding and the upkeep and management of these lands. It is a problem. It is a problem right now because these lands, remember, all of these lands are already federal lands. So if we're concerned about lack of resources, lack of management, that is an existing challenge that we're going to have to work through. There's nothing about my bill that makes that harder or that worsens it, but you're right, and my bill doesn't fix all of that. We're going to have to continue working through federal budgets and other creative ways to get that addressed, and I commit to do that.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Morgan Rourke. I have one of the grazing allotments on the Shasta Trinity. My family does. One continued question along those lines. Yes, it's going to stay in my family. Is it transferable once it's wilderness? Can another entity, it's not in your bill?
Yeah.
For mining,
I
grazing?
believe so, but I'll tell you what, rather than me just tell you that, let me verify, but I believe so. It is certainly my intent to make that the case. And let us include that as one of the things that I'll get back to you with a specific written response. But
Thank you.
Right here and now, I'll tell you it is my intent that it would be transferable. And we'll make sure that's the case.
Not just the family, to any entity that wishes to graze.
Under that, yeah, I think that because that would, to make it non-transferable would change your property right? Right? Because
Yes.
right now it is transferable.
Yes.
So maybe I'm answering my own question on the fly here, but
I
it
hope
seems
that's
to
the
me
case.
that the provision that I've put in here that makes it clear that that property right remains intact and unchanged protects your right to transfer it, not just to use it for your
Okay.
family.
Because my understanding of previous wilderness acts in this county, they were given, grandfathered in, and then when it was not renewed by the person on the permit, it was lost.
Well, that might be a non-renewal issue, at which point.
That is my question.
Yeah, so, I mean, it would need to be renewed under the ordinary course of renewing a permit, but the transferability should be unchanged. I'll confirm it though.
Okay. I have further questions and concerns. A couple statements you had. We were behind the game of fire. We were way behind the game of management. In our allotment alone, and on our forest alone, we have one road maintenance worker for the U.S. Forest Service. We do not have the money to maintain campsites on our allotment, yet I'm required to continue my maintenance. I have concerns of accessibility as everybody else. Am I going to be able to use motorized travel in the wilderness areas to fulfill my duties of my allotment?
So if you are currently using motorized travel through a wilderness area to access private property or to utilize your grazing permit, the answer is yes, you can continue doing that.
It is my understanding on funding that the new Wilderness Act and restoration gives precedence in that the funding that comes through requires that it goes towards this new land entitlement, whether it's wilderness or restoration.
Well, not exactly. There's a directive for the Forest Service to go out and for BLM to go out and use whatever authorities they have to get the money to execute these priority projects. In the restoration area, in particular, that's where a lot of the extra work is getting done. But we've also got some studies of new trails and other things where we don't have the funding, but we're asking them to enter into partnerships and to creatively look at existing sources to get that funding.
So is the answer yes or no?
That we don't have the funding?
That is priority to the wilderness.
The wilderness won't be additional cost. I mean, the only thing we're telling them to do differently in that wilderness area that they're not already doing is to do fire planning. Yeah.
So, last comment. We haven't been logging areas, you said, since 1989. Yet we're going to, in your words, that we probably won't ever do it again there. Why are we worried about wilderness when everybody seems to be worried about management? I have a recommendation of possibly splitting your bill into two entities, one for wilderness and one for management. It seems like everybody is more on board with the whole management aspect in overall meetings, resources, county. Is there any thought to that?
Well, I personally like the way this bill is a little unconventional by combining all of these things. I think that's what makes it a comprehensive bill that ought to create broad support. If I were to start carving it up into pieces that some people like but other people don't, it's a very different bill. And so I think I appreciate the fact that I hear you saying you like parts of the bill and not others. I'm gonna try to keep doing a comprehensive public lands bill, and I'll try to listen to the concerns about the parts you don't like and do them in the best way I can. But I want to keep that broader vision of the bill. I think that's what makes it unique. Thank you.
Hi there. Nice to see you, Congressman. My name is Allison Sterling Nichols. I am a resident in Humboldt County. So thank you for letting me speak here. Thank you for coming. I completely support your legislation, and since it also applies to the county I live in, I just wanted to thank you for that. I just wanted to speak to one issue in particular, which is recreation economy, because my daughter Camden and her friend Jazzy and I came over here today so we could hear you speak about this legislation. Then they talked me into taking them out to eat at Mama Llama's after that, and then I'll be shopping over holiday. I have to get used to not calling it Tops. So I will definitely be spending more money in Trinity County today than I would have had I spent the day in West Haven gardening, which was my other plan. So I'm one of thousands and thousands of people who come here. We're hiking in the Trinity Alps tomorrow. I'm sure they'll talk me into another meal when we come out the trailhead. So there's so many people like me who come here to see these beautiful places and frequent local businesses while we're here. I actually didn't do my grocery shopping over there so that I could, in my mind, it should benefit the local economy here when people access these local places. So I get confused when people say that there is no such thing as a recreation economy, because I feel like I'm personally getting to it all the time. So thanks again for the legislation. We really appreciate it, and for coming to speak.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming today so we could talk to you face to face. My name is Kate Graves. I'm from Trinity County. There's a couple of things I wanted to clarify. Some of it, for example, we already have a visitor center in Weaverville. It's right downtown. It's under Spiral Staircase if you want to stop and see it. It's staffed by all volunteers. If you put this in your bill, you will be giving taxpayer funding to a separate visitor center, and pretty much running the volunteers out after all their hard work. It's a well-established visitor center. Also, there was, you said that the federal government owns the land. That is not correct. The federal government has a proprietorial interest, which means they manage the land. They do not own it.
Which land are you talking about?
The federal land is not owned. It's managed.
Yeah, it's owned.
No, it's never. Well, I mean, you need to go research that. It's never been ceded by the state to the federal government. It's a proprietorial interest.
I think I'm getting into some legal theories that I'm not
No.
entirely familiar with.
No, you just need to go look it up. You can go ask the Forest Service, you can go ask the Forest Service supervisor. He will tell you they manage the land, if that helps. You can go ask the district ranger. He'll tell you they manage the land. So those are clarifying things. Some of the issues that people are bringing up, and you say no, it'll be fine. We already have a history of the federal government denying access to people to lands that they should have access to. They gate it and don't give them a key, and if you don't like it, you can sue them. And it's not just the Forest Service, it's BLM. And most people do not have the money and wherewithal to sue the federal government to prove that they are right. And it happens more than you know. I know several people, different agencies have done this to them, and they've been forced to sell their land to conservancy groups because no one else can buy land you can't access, and then it's turned over to the federal government. As far as our grazing,
Can I just
sure
say something about that? I have not heard of that happening, but let me just say that I do work all the time on behalf of constituents that are having a problem with a federal government agency. So if anybody in this room or anyone else you know is being locked out of their property by a federal agency, I want to know so that I can go to work. And they don't have to sue the federal government. They can call their congressman and we can work on making that situation right. But I didn't mean to interrupt you.
well, that's okay, because the people I know have already lost their properties. So this is another thing. We talked about congressional acts. There's a congressional act specifically towards Trinity County that it should be maintained as a grazing county, which is why it's so hard. The process in our county to have closed range as opposed to open range is hard to do because there's a congressional act that we are meant to be a grazing county. Yet everything the Forest Service and federal land managers do closes that down. You say that established mining, established grazing. Well, those you don't cross a T or dot an I and they're gone. And you can tell that easily if you had any kind of perspective on our history of how many people used to do it and how few people do it. And it's a very tenuous thing, and it disappears like that. There's a lot of things like that that you don't seem to, and I get it's a broad thing and it's very specific, but there's a lot of things that you just said here that are not correct. And I get that you're getting information on this because you don't know it, but the Forest Service itself they manage the land, they used to make their money by logging it. They would log it, the county would get a percentage of that logging.
Yeah, your time is hit
I know, but
there's time after we alter.
okay, well, I'm just letting you know, there almost a lot of the things you said here, and I'm not going to say they're deceptive. I'm saying they come from just not knowing.
Well, and maybe some of our disagreement, if there is one, comes from not being clear. So if I might, you've described a bunch of circumstances and situations where people have been jerked around by federal agencies and had their rights compromised. That's right now. That's whatever you're describing had nothing to do with my bill. When I answer these questions that have come up about what will my bill do, I've been very honest and very specific about what the bill says and what it will do. Maybe we're talking past each other a little bit, but I think
but your
different.
information is so off that you think the federal government owns the land.
Yeah, I think these are all federal public lands. Now, we may be able to, I will look up the theory that you're alluding to here that suggests it's not an outright ownership interest. I'm happy to look at that, but I'm not sure that it matters. I mean, clearly they have a legal right to manage the land. I don't think that's in dispute, but we're talking about how it's managed, and that's what this bill is about.
Okay, well, I guess I'll bring some other stuff up later because the whole process of the Forest Service you don't seem to understand.
Nobody does.
Thank you for coming to Trinity County. And I want to, on behalf of
I love Trinity County, by the way. I come here all the time. I have vacation here with my family. I come here to fish. I come here just because it's a great place. So happy to do business here on this particular trip, but I do want to make clear that I would bet you, dinner at any restaurant in Trinity County that I've been here more than any member of Congress has ever been here.
You have. And, my name is Larry Glass, and I have a home on South Fork Mountain, right in the middle of Matthew Rourke's grazing allotment. I've been with his family for 40 years. But I want to apologize for some of the folks here who have come here to do battle with you.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's a good conversation.
But it's an embarrassment to me as a resident of Trinity County that we get this reputation of being a bunch of crazies. And not that there aren't some crazy people here. I've been known to get a little...
You know where I'm on a plane to tomorrow? If you want to talk about craziness, I'm going to Washington. So.
But just so you know, that the last speaker doesn't speak.
No, it's all good.
Anyways, when it comes to fire, I want to talk about that because I'm a big proponent of saving Chinkapin in perpetuity, so my grandkids' kids can go in and experience Chinkapin as the unique place that it is. I know of no other place, and I've been to a lot of wilderness areas all over the western United States and British Columbia. I have never seen a stand of old-growth Douglas fir that's closed canopy like that, that's completely intact for such a large area. And I want to see that protected. But at the same time, I want the whole landscape protected. And we know now that most fire starts happen along roadsides. That's why we came up with the roadside shaded fuel break plan. That's why we want to treat plantations, because they're the place that the fire gets a head going and then moves into the canopy. So, and we're not ignoring the Fire Safe Councils. The Trinity Collaborative took the Fire Safe Council's plans into account when we came up with our big plan. So we've got 730,000 acres that we want to work in the restoration area. In the last 10 years, the Forest Service has managed to harvest 8,700 acres in that, in 10 years. And most of that was on the Six Rivers side. So we want to ramp it up. So yeah, I want Pattison and South Fork and Chinkapin saved as wilderness, but I want to ramp up activity in the restoration area, which surrounds those. It will protect them and it will protect all the communities. Thank you again for your great bill.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for coming here today, Congressman Huffman. My name is Bob Ring and I live at Canyon Creek. So this is a report on Canyon Creek. All summer long, you will find 50 to 150 cars parked at the trail, sometimes a half a mile down the trail. So that's 50 to several hundred people visiting Canyon Creek all summer long. And they're buying beer and gas, groceries, they're going to restaurants. The ones who like a little luxury off the trail are going to a motel for a nice shower. So the wilderness is economically positive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, but we're not done. No,
at some point.
maybe. Okay, anyone who hasn't spoke?
Thank you, Congressman Huffman, for coming here to Trinity County. I'm a supporter of the bill. I'm a supporter of wilderness. We're in the midst of a growing biodiversity crisis on this planet, and wilderness, new wilderness that's established on federal land is only our little bit that we can do to contribute to having these islands of habitat that are preserved for future generations, for future plants and animals, for water quality. And I'm glad to see that these areas are being recognized and formally protected. But my question is I And I could go on and on about wilderness and habitat. I'm also an arborist. I do fuels reduction for people, and I'm really glad to see the shaded fuel break, the working forest part of your bill. But when I've talked with this bill to people, I've touted it, and I've tried to see where is the negative economically. Because I think there's a lot of conception that passing this bill is going to take economic opportunities away from people or hurt a certain part of the economy here in Trinity County. And I haven't found that. And I just want to ask you honestly, is there a negative here that you're not being honest with us about, that we're not seeing in your bill? Because I only see that positive.
No, it's a great question. Thank you. And I can't emphasize this enough. From the beginning, as we put this thing together and continuing as we have revised it many, many times in response to feedback, we've tried to make sure that those things that could either be perceived or be actual negatives economically be addressed. And that's why we don't have road closures. That's why we have anticipated the private property right arguments and addressed them in, I think, some fairly, inarguable ways in this bill. And all of that gets balanced against the additional forest work that will happen as a result of this bill, that will bring economic activity, and then all of that recreation activity that we hope to generate as well. I see nothing but economic upside in this bill for Trinity County. And again, you have to compare it to the status quo, not to some idealized notion of going back to the heyday of logging in the 1980s. That's not going to happen. And it wouldn't happen in the areas we're talking about in this bill anyway. They're remote, hard to get to, unlikely to be logged, unlikely to be mined. So I see a heck of a lot of economic upside, virtually none or no economic downside. And I appreciate the question, because it's a chance for me to again make that point, which I probably can't make enough times, because it's the core of what this bill is all about. Last point. Thank you for putting wilderness in the context of the broader biodiversity crisis that we have on the planet. I chair the Water, Oceans, and Wildlife Subcommittee back in the House of Representatives. We had a hearing about a month ago with some of the world's very top scientists who are doing a rather unprecedented report on this extinction crisis, this biodiversity crisis. One of their core recommendations is that we've got to have areas that are permanently protected against habitat loss in order for species to have any chance of survival. So we can't put them everywhere. We've got developed footprints in lots and lots of places, but whenever we can seize an opportunity to find a pristine, ecologically significant place and give it that level of protection, we're helping address something that's really, really important, not just for Trinity County, but for the planet. So thanks.
So is there somebody new come? Yeah, hasn't spoke yet. Sorry. Okay.
Hi. My name is Kenneth Baldwin. I've lived here since 1972. I'm a consulting forester. I've worked on all the forestry issues and fire issues in this county. I think this is a really good bill. I really support it. I support wilderness. I'm currently, tomorrow I'm taking 8 kids, 9 to 11 years old, out into the wilderness through the Ascend Wilderness Experience program. This program offers kids this opportunity for free. Doesn't cost them anything. There's a national organization that's interested in wilderness stewardship that is one of the primary funders of this. So kids 6 to 18 get this opportunity. Lots of kids have, I think there's something like 50 kids so far that have been using the wilderness. So I'm a great supporter of wilderness. I'm also a great supporter of managing the forest. And I think this forest restoration area is a great idea. The one question I have about this, because I like to have all the tools possible to manage lands, is I understand that there's going to be a restriction on the use of stock, cattle grazing. There's going to be a restriction, and I think that certainly goats have been used in California in many areas to reduce brush, and that's a way to possibly get into some of these plantations where there's a lot of brush and they can't be operated on with equipment. I think also cattle can reduce the grass fuels, the vine fuels. So I'm wondering why there is that restriction in those areas.
So Kenneth, thanks for the question, and you're right. As the bill is currently worded, grazing is not one of the vegetation management tools that are called out. Supervisor Groves has brought this up in a couple of meetings with me, and I have certainly thought a lot about this. And you could imagine some situations where goats or other, not wide open, grazing, conventional grazing, but some very strategic grazing might be a very valid vegetation management tool in the right circumstance. So I'm open to continuing my long history of making changes at the request of Supervisor Groves. So let me just tell you that we have taken wilderness areas out. We have put in buffer zones. He has been a champion for a bunch of issues that have come up here in Trinity County, and he's continued to bring up this as one of several issues. We'll keep working on this, and I think conventional grazing in these, certainly in the wilderness, but also in the special restoration area, would not be consistent with the restoration purpose, but some strategic grazing as a vegetation management tool might make sense, and I'm willing to look at that.
Great. Thank you.
I've not opened it up to repeat customers yet. Okay.
Board, Mr. Huffman, my name is Terry Sheen, a registered professional forester, longtime resident. I came here in '76 and was hired by Southern Pacific, Santa Fe Railroad and the Southern Pacific, and I've roaded all of north of the lake to top of Mount Eddy and Scott Mountain. So you're able to walk roads into all of these high lakes. For those handicapped or whatever, they're all accessible. They do have gates, as Michigan Cow now owns it, but they have no problem with people going in and camping and seeing these beautiful lakes that most people can't walk to without some sort of trails or help. We were logging approximately 500 million board feet for about 20 years. The Forest Service and private timber companies here in Trinity County. We now are down to less than 50 million. We still have the timber, nothing's changed, but we've lost the mills. We've lost all of our buildings are being vacated. People are leaving Trinity County because there's nothing to support them. We used to have 27 logging sites going every year. These people fought our fighters. They were our firemen. They had their equipment ready, their load bed. They would take it and all of our sides would move. That's why there was never any big fires. We have no one out there now because we've stopped logging. We put so much restriction that we were, exploding inside ourselves. And this wilderness bill has some good stuff, but adding in all these other little red areas is not. These are, stay with the wilderness we have, add to those pockets and Yuba County and that. But this area that I've walked, all these, they're right in the middle of our plantation, our fuel, roadside fuel thing. This is where we're doing all of our work, and these little 7 splotches should be removed like we did with groves, because up in groves there's some very valuable minerals in those canyons that we can use to harvest the minerals for just their own mining companies or other towns development up in the very top end of the county. Where there's hardly anybody that lives there now, but these big manufacturing people come in to mine the coal and the chrome, the mercury, the salt, and the natural gas underneath the soils. We have lots here to offer the state of California, this county. And we would increase our population, which would increase businesses and people and stores and keep us thriving. And when you take away 450 million board feet of timber, yeah, this is what you see, is a ghost town. And Agenda 21, ICLA, says that they want to have everybody from Trinity County out of here. So that's very distressing. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to check on time, and I know board has questions. What is your time frame?
I have a 6 p.m. flight. I'm here as long as you want me.
We do have others.
I know.
John has some other plans for me.
He doesn't know it.
John's got it. Yeah. So is there anyone new that hasn't spoke yet?
Hi, my name is Josh Smith. I work for the Watershed Center. We're a nonprofit organization based in Hayfork, but we work all over the place. I just want to say, first of all, we do like an awful lot of the ideas. The details are where we'd like to. I'm hoping there's still opportunity to work with you guys on some of this stuff. Some of the things that we do already work on are trespass grove reclamation work. We do trail maintenance work, like on Bigfoot Trail, for example. We do water quality and fisheries restoration work. I'm just curious how some of these things, like how the bill is actually going to show us, give us some support and help us in our endeavors. And what I'm kind of concerned about is how this could have influence on the way the Forest Service prioritizes things.
So, no, thanks. Great question, and it sounds like you do some great work. So, one of the things we've tried to do is to encourage partnerships with nonprofits and other community groups and state and local government partners, because the federal government never has enough resources to get a lot of this work done. We've created a new partnership specific to remediating these trespass marijuana grow sites that are such an environmental problem. And given it some new authorities to do a lot of the things that it sounds like you want to do, and you be a natural partner in some of that work. So I hope you'll take a look at that section of the bill in particular. That would get revenue from the stewardship contracts in the special restoration area. Some of that revenue would be available to support those type of projects. So if there are other ideas that can help us move remediation of those grow sites forward, or do other partnership efforts with community groups like yours, I'm wide open to it.
Are there so there's provisions about making plans, but who is involved in those making those plans? Like,
You mean
I didn't
plans
see that.
for like trails and visitor centers, things like that?
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's a public process. There are some existing regulations that kind of set forth how that needs to happen. We've added some additional consultation requirements to make sure that the local community is at the table at every step of the way. So, again, take a look at that. If you think we need to fortify that even more to make sure that your voice is heard, tell me what it ought to say.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Okay, just to be conscious of time here and our time limit, I'm going to bring it back to the board. If there's time later, maybe I'll open it up for those who spoke, but that's a very big maybe. So I'll bring it back to the board, and who would like some questions? I'll go last as chair.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming. And thank you for your generous time in Washington. You gave us over an hour. So at that time, we gave you a list, and I want to be clear to the public that the lists that we talked about really we haven't discussed the wilderness part of it, and have not realized that this will be wilderness. We're not looking for management changes in wilderness. Virtually everything that we're talking about is in the restoration area, which I personally have a little more heartburn in because this is national forest, and I'm not quite sure why we're treating it different than just doing what we're supposed to do in national parks. But with that said, and I think there's a real, for us people that have been in Trinity County a long time, we have a hard time accepting promises. And I've made this point to you before, but when we're told you can keep your rights, it doesn't work out that way. And maybe that's not what was entitled by the original bills and previous wilderness bills, but that's how it works out. And so I'll take the example of the grazing. You allow people to keep up their grazing, but then there's this caveat, subject to such reasonable regulations, policies, and practices as the Secretary considers, which means the Secretary has the ability to say, okay, you can't graze there.
Which he does right now. So it's another way of saying the same secretarial discretion to make sure that there are rules in place to make sure the grazing is done appropriately, that will continue to be in place. That's all that's saying.
In the past, we've seen a heightened tightening of those rules and basically driving people out of these areas. And I think that there should be a sensitivity, understanding that maybe that's not what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't have a crystal ball, but we know that a lot of really bad things happen to private property owners in this county through the 70s into the 90s. So with that, the first question that I asked is that, again, this is in the restoration area, the use of wildland fire as a management tool. And in here it says the Secretary shall use wildland fire to the extent practicable to achieve the purpose of this section. And so, again, there was other people that made this point. From Washington, we're telling them that you must use wildland fire to be a management tool instead of allowing the person on the ground to make that decision.
Okay, you want to dive into that one?
Sure.
So I think the term, the limitation to the extent practicable makes it clear that you're not just letting all wildland fire burn, and there are a bunch of provisions in this bill that make it clear that even in wilderness areas, even in the special restoration area, this is all about protecting communities. You can use heavy equipment, you can do whatever it takes to protect those communities. So if I need to make that more clear, I'm happy to do that. But look, if a fire is burning out in a remote part of the wilderness and it's not threatening communities, the most efficient tool in some cases is to let it burn. If there's reason to believe that that's going to threaten property or lives or other things that we care about protecting, that changes everything. And all of the tools for fire suppression come into play under this bill and, frankly, under current law. So if that reference to fire as a management tool needs further clarification, we can talk about what it takes, but that limitation on to the extent practical was meant for precisely that reason, to make it clear we're not letting every fire just burn.
Well, again, in past practices, the Forest Service can use mechanized machinery in the wilderness today.
Yep.
And they can, if somebody gets hurt, they can land a helicopter there. I mean, there's all these things they can do, but they don't. And if we're going to talk about the recreation, anybody that had a business or was in downtown Weirville last year realized that fire, 1 year of fire equals 20 years of good recreation to try to make that back up. So I'll just say my piece that I think that should be left more to the forest supervisor to decide what is the best action.
If that particular section said may rather than shall, would that address your concern?
That's what the recommendation was.
Oh, are you back down?
I'm sorry. Sorry, the second issue we talked about was the road decommissioning. And I think what the big worry is that we have a pretty low quality maps. And we talk about that you're not going to close any legal roads, but we don't know what that means. I mean, we know someplace there's a map that says this is a legal road or not. In the past, we've been caught in situations where there's been a road that's been used for 20 years, and then they say, no, this hasn't been a legal road, and it gets closed. So without quality maps that say these are the roads that would be eligible to stay open and these are not, and we have asked for, I mean, it's a very difficult mapping thing, I understand, but it's very tough to go off.
And my understanding, Supervisor Groves, is that this is mainly an issue of these so-called co-op roads, where SPI and others has perhaps used roads to access timber that were not shown as open roads on the map. And a couple of things about that. One, my understanding is that most of those areas of concern were in the eastern Trinity Alps wilderness proposal that has been taken out of the bill at your request. So we think that most of the sensitivity on that issue has already been addressed. But I think that the other provisions of the bill that make it clear, whether it's a road on a map or just a road by way of practice that's been used, if it's proposed for closure and decommissioning, the Forest Service has to jump through a bunch of hoops that we have specified that I think would prevent someone from suddenly finding a gate that prevented them from accessing their property or their timber.
So my request there was no change, but just to get us, or to get the public some quality.
It's a very valid point, and I mentioned in my opening remarks, I heard this I think on my first trip to Trinity County from your sheriff at the time, a public safety concern about roads being arbitrarily closed without his input. So there is a specific provision in this bill that is meant to address that provides more consultation and process than current law. So if we will do better than current law to prevent that situation from happening.
The third question is the grazing. I think we've gone over that pretty well. I think you portrayed my point as I portrayed to you. Grazing as a fuel reduction tool. We heard this. The county just had a discussion about herbicides, and one whole group that is pushing to the wilderness was all talking about how great we should have these animals in the forest. So I'll let that be, and we can work on that. The fourth was the line under the withdrawal, and it's withdrawal in the future, and again, this is a restoration area, from all forms of entry, appropriation, and disposal under public land, and withdrawal from location, entry, and patented under mining law, and deposition under all laws relating to mineral and geothermal leasing and mineral materials. Again, in the restoration area, that seems to be counterintuitive of what federal lands does in non-wilderness. I totally understand within the wilderness, but if there's a parcel that needs to be swapped for something next to the wilderness, this becomes very limiting. Recreational mining is a thing here, and it does generate some revenue. So the question is why are we treating that different than our normal national forests?
Yeah, so I am informed that there are some mining claims in the special restoration area. I think they are mostly recreational mining. We have preserved and protected those claims. So the only issue comes up if somebody thinks that there could be new claims in the future. And this is just one of these situations where there are certain activities that would be compatible and others that would be incompatible with the restoration purpose that this particular area is designated for. And new mining claims, I think, would be incompatible. In reality, I just don't know that this has that much of an effect. I mean, these areas have been open for folks to stake claim for a long, long time. And I guess if you think there's a whole bunch of new mining claims that are going to rush into this area, that would be a concern. I have no evidence that there is, and we've done what I think is appropriate to protect the ones that have been established.
And again, I would fall back on past practices of the Forest Service is to do issues to remove the present, which we had that discussion.
With or without my bill, right? I mean, that's something that.
No, that was actually that was tied to the wilderness bills, previous wilderness bills. They worked very hard to eliminate as a policy, not as a bill. And again, it's because
Maybe as a
trust.
practice. I'm not aware of a written policy that did that, but I've told you privately, Keith, that if there's ever a situation where somebody's got a valid claim to mine or do anything else and a government agency is jerking them around, I will go to bat for them. But it has nothing to do with my bill. It's apparently a long-standing concern, but it's the kind of work we do for constituents all the time.
And so I guess the restoration starts looking to be like a pre-wilderness area. So it's coming to a different designation than national forest. It's restoration, excuse me. And so we're starting to eliminate other activities.
It's a pretty different kind of wilderness because you're going to have logging and you're going to have all kinds of forest treatment going on actively. In fact, we're calling for more. So I've never seen anything like that in anything that had the wilderness label. I think it's very different.
Well, we had testimony from Joseph last time that they felt that they could only do 3,000 acres a year of this work. And so we hope that really steps.
Yeah, me too.
Otherwise, it can never get done. The trail study, I brought this up before, and again, it's not having a good map. There's no place here, we talked about trails in the new wilderness areas, studying those trails. And of course, a huge concern here is our old wilderness, and especially the Trinity Alps, is an economic driver, unlike other wildernesses. And there's trails that haven't been maintained in 4 or 5 years that are fabulous trails. And so it is tough for people to swallow. You're going to make more wilderness that you can't take in the wilderness, care of the wilderness you have to do. So I guess the ask in this was, why isn't there planning to put more wilderness trails in the new wilderness?
Well, one of the challenges that we have with or without my bill is we have limited resources for these federal agencies. If I were to call for new trails in these wilderness areas, I would immediately be criticized for not having the resources to pay for those new trails. With or without my bill, I'm hearing the justifiable concern that we're not putting enough money into maintaining existing trails. So I think the best I can do is call for a new focus on trail planning, continue to fight year in and year out for more funding for these agencies so they can do a better job of maintaining trails. Authorize the kind of partnerships that you see throughout this bill so that volunteers, so that community groups, nonprofits, and others can actually jump in and lend a hand in doing a better job on the issue that you have flagged. If there's other creative ideas to get at this, believe me, the whole goal is to have trails that people use that are well maintained. I think we share that goal. So if you got a specific proposal, I'm open to it. If adding the new wilderness areas into some future trail studies would help address the concern that you're raising, we can talk about that. But I think we're going to be working on this challenge of limited resources to take care of our trails with or without this bill, probably for as long as all of us are around.
Well, since you already talk about studying trails out of the wilderness area, so you're going to catch sheep for that, you might as well throw in catching sheep for doing it anyway. And then it comes, then the elephant in the room is the stewardship contracts and the potential, what I call royalties that that Trinity County and every county gets 25% of the gross receipts on timber. So therefore, in a way, we have at least a royalty or ownership of a percentage of that. I mean, this bill does do away with any revenues that would come to the county. And we can argue that, you know, at one time those revenues were $14 million and last year they were $89,000. And where that number is going to be 50 years from now, and quite frankly, none of us know. But we do know here we're giving something up. And if it was only $100,000, that's $50,000 for the schools, and $50,000 for our roads.
Yeah.
And so we understand, or I understand that you can't just say we get money out of this bill, but we've looked at different ways for the county to be reimbursed for this. One was brought up today, and we talked about that under the Wilderness Act in Idaho, and I can make specifics otherwise, that the government deeded over part of that, things that were important to the county. For example, we have schools on federal land, we have airports on federal land, we have electrical systems on federal land, that at least the county would benefit by getting those out into county, or fire districts, or, you know, whatever municipal agency is working on that. And I'd hope to see you at least take that as a consideration.
So, Supervisor, this is a big subject. If there are any situations where land exchange makes sense, where the federal government can swap land with Trinity County or with the PUD and have a win-win situation, you know from our history of working together that I will support that, and in fact I passed a bill to enable that to happen. Exactly that kind of an arrangement. Nothing about this bill would preclude that from happening in other appropriate areas, but you've just got to find parcels that make sense to pair with each other to do that kind of a swap. I don't think there's anything within the special restoration area that we've proposed that sets up for that, or at least nobody has called it out in all of these years of having the maps up and everything else. But I will commit to you to continuing to look for those creative win-win opportunities anywhere in Trinity County and bring them to me, and let's find a way to do a land swap that makes sense, that's good for the county, and that's fair to the federal government. We can probably pass that and make it happen. Now, PILT is an important source of revenue for the county, I get that. That's why I'm fighting every single year to try to get it funded for the long term, not these Band-Aids that we tend to come up with. You know, it's frustrating, but that seems to be the drill back in Washington. The area that we have designated for the special restoration area over the last 10 years produced almost no timber harvest. It was a tiny, tiny percentage of the overall acreage. And so the 25% that you referred to that went to the county, I don't mean to trivialize small amounts of money, but compared to the economic benefit that this county would see from all of the additional forest treatment that we think is going to happen as a result of this bill, I think we net positively for the county and for, you know, not just county government, but for the broader county economy. Last point. You're right, stewardship contracting is preferred in the special restoration area, but conventional timber harvesting is not prohibited. It just says that you are to use stewardship contracting to the maximum extent practicable. And so if there is some situation where the Forest Service, in its discretion, comes up with a conventional timber harvest plan that accomplishes the purposes consistent with the restoration area, it could happen and that royalty could go forward in the ordinary course. I just think for lots of reasons that we've already talked about, stewardship contracting is a really good fit for the kind of projects we want to do, and it also keeps that money locally circulating in the economy in ways that will help the county.
So I want to clarify, when I'm talking about, I'm not talking about land swaps, I'm talking about as part of the bill, that land is given to the county, not a swap situation. And that is my understanding of what happened in the Idaho Wilderness Bill.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. If you got a specific proposal, Supervisor, bring it forward.
And, you know, we'd love to see 25% of the stewardship purposes come to the county.
That would require changing the stewardship contracting authorities, which is a bigger, I'm
Well,
not sure that my friends in Washington would let me do that only for Trinity County, but.
Well, you can always give
never
it a
know.
try.
Equal protection.
Well, I think that, and we can go around and around in circles and talk about the economic benefit, but, and we don't, none of us know, so, but I know what we are giving up to try to get there. And then just a couple of things, you mentioned in that your discussions with the collaborative, that you brought things in the collaborative. I do want to clear that it may have been collaborative members, but not the collaboratives.
In what respect, Supervisor?
You talked about putting things in this bill that was, that you worked with the collaborative, that it was collaborative members.
So what I think I said was that the types of projects that we are calling for in this bill are exactly the kind of projects that the collaborative has prioritized and developed. So I think the work of the collaborative has very much informed this bill. We've also, I've sent John Driscoll over here to meetings of the collaborative to talk specifically about this bill. I think all of that is what I said, and I'll stand by that.
And, yeah, that's all I have now.
Okay, I appreciate it. Last time we talked, you said you were 90% in support of the bill, so I'm hoping to move the needle. You know, that I told Supervisor Groves, when in life do you get to have more than 90% of anything that you want, right? I mean, come on, guys.
So what was my response to you?
He's a tough sell.
That he's getting 100%, so we just need to come to the middle in that 5%.
Supervisor Chadwick.
Any comments, questions?
No, I two comments. Thank you very much. And I think the funding is a high priority for people. It's hard to expect somebody to do better with more when they haven't done good with a little. And that's what we have. So appreciate all your time. I think this is the beginning of workshops. I know District 3 and 5 need to weigh in, and I know that they aren't here because it is a long distance from here to the other side. So I appreciate you being here. The funding is I think, a priority that we need to understand. If we're expanding, how we do that when the maintenance is already not being taken care of. And to clean up the course, I don't want to see it burn. That's why we want to protect it. And so to just let it burn is a big concern, because there might not be a community nearby when it starts. But we have seen, everybody in this room has lived through, well, it's, on the other side of the hill, whether it be in North County or in High Pond, and the next thing we know is they're in our yards because, it just travels too fast. So, I do appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to the talks about the county.
Yes, John, could you let us know, or just let me know when you're going to be voting on this, when you will be voting on this, so I can express, let our constituents know who to contact with the board or against it, or what moves forward.
You want me to, I haven't spoken to the legislative process and where the bill stands. Would you like me to kind of?
I can watch that, and John kind of keeps.
I would.
Okay. Oh, well, okay, then do it for everybody. You're going to do it for her.
Yeah, all right, well, look, I'll be quick. We've had one legislative hearing, which is the first step in the process of a bill. Those of you that remember Schoolhouse Rock, that's the way it starts for a bill becoming a law. The next step would be a markup hearing in the Natural Resources Committee. There's no markup hearing currently scheduled. I think the soonest there could possibly be a markup hearing would be after Congress returns from the August recess, and probably sometime in the fall. you're not done yet. You've still got to go to the floor of the House for a full vote. So, you know, you're getting pretty far into the end of the year calendar. And then, of course, we've got the entire Senate process, whatever that is. So it sort of starts over there. This has got a long way to go. And that's why I appreciate the chance to continue to check in and work through concerns as it moves forward. Thank you.
Okay, I'll have some wrap-up questions here. I think funding. Supervisor Chadwick and I just came back from a National Association of Counties all across the West. Supervisors certainly talk about lack of funding. It's a much larger issue than this bill, of course, and you know, from maintenance to expansion. So that's an issue that I know you have your eye on that ball. In terms of the restoration area, of the 700,000 plus acres, how is that split between Six Rivers and Shasta Trinity?
I think it's almost all in Shasta Trinity, isn't it, John? Or it's about 3/4. 3/4?
Okay. And you mentioned earlier, you know, we have our collaborative and our various frustrations over the years. And I know our friends from Shasta Trinity might still be in the room, and this is not directed at them personally, but historically we have seen differences in approach.
Six Rivers has been a little easier to get things done.
There we go. That's right. So, if some of this legislation does help push the ball down the field a little more, that obviously there's some organizational differences, and I don't know if that bill will address that, but that might help get some of the issues that really affect Trinity. And of course, Six Rivers has done a great work in Southern Trinity.
Well, I'm actually glad you brought that up, because it's one of the reasons that I've done a lot in this bill to make it more likely that the Shasta Trinity projects would actually happen, because they haven't. And I've shared your frustration, because I've come to collaborative meetings and tried to do everything I can as a member of Congress to just push these agencies to get their consultations done quicker and to dedicate the resources and prioritize this stuff, and yet often it still just doesn't happen in the Shasta Trinity. It happens in the Six Rivers. So this bill, I think, will further direct in a way that will improve that.
And that light bulb went on for me when you were talking earlier, like, well, he knows our frustrations in the collaborative, and yes, some of the project we have talked about did materialize out of the collaborative discussion. So I hope that will help. I know it's been a big frustration for the collaborative and just people of Trinity County. We have Steve sitting here, and that one question was asked about water, and he made this special trip from Sacramento. I don't want him not to have some input. The water issue came up at our collaborative meeting when all of them were there. You had the scenic river. There were some questions brought up by the public to me and our other board members on
fire drafting.
Water rights and where it stops and goes. Keith, do you remember that question specifically?
Well, my understanding, and I wasn't at that.
No, but we've had that discussion earlier.
But the question that we feel that's never been quite answered is the impact. We understand that this is on federal lands, but what does the state do by following federal regulations? So we know under state law you can't draft for cannabis, or my understanding, out of a river that's a national wild and scenic river. And the forest setback is farther on California private lands that's on a federal national scenic river. So is there more things that go on from the state level, or do you know, or? Sure.
Yeah.
By all means.
Water 101 with Steve.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Evans. I'm the Wild Rivers Director for the California Wilderness Coalition. Been working on wild and scenic river issues for pretty close to 30 years now in California. So, The National Wild and Scenic Rivers Act makes it clear that the state remains the agency that decides on water rights. It doesn't affect valid existing water rights, and that includes the Forest Service's own valid existing water rights. The Forest Service considers water drafting to fight fire. This is an important use and right of use for water, so it doesn't affect that. However, rivers that are designated by Congress are then considered by the State Water Board as being fully appropriated, which means it might be difficult to apply for and be granted new water rights. But it does not affect anybody's valid existing water right, including riparian rights. In terms of the special treatment area under the State Board of Forestry rules, this is the only land use impact that I've ever been able to ascertain from wild and scenic designation. So if you own property along either a federal or state designated wild and scenic river, the Board of Forestry rules do require the establishment of a special treatment area in terms of forestry along that river. What's interesting about it is those rules don't specify what special treatment is required for that. It's entirely left to the registered professional forester that develops the timber harvest plan. It does not affect the routine kind of activities needed to remove trees that are hazardous to your property or house or public safety. It only applies to where timber harvest plans.
Put a fine point on that, Steve. One of the earlier speakers brought up the scenario where a stream fills up with debris following a fire, and would the wild and scenic designation prevent the clearing out for safety purposes, et cetera, and my understanding is it would not.
It doesn't affect restoration activities.
Still be able to.
The Trinity flowing, past your community today is a federal and state wild and scenic river, and not everybody agreed with the restoration activities that occurred on that river, but you've all seen that bulldozers were used to restore that river. That was all done in the name of restoring the fishery that is that river's outstanding and remarkable value.
Any other questions on water? I think it was really important. You were very helpful in the
Well, thank you.
collaborative, so I did not want you to sit here for nothing.
Well, I was just here to ask questions or answer questions if needed, so thank you.
Great, thank you. And can you elaborate a little bit more? I mean, I know back to funding on some level on the efforts of the trespass growth. It's always certainly been an issue. Again, the Forest Service can only do so much with the limited funding they have.
Right. So this bill creates a new partnership that is all the federal agencies that are affected by this, as well as our state counterparts, local government, private nonprofits, universities, other entities, and gives them a set of tools so they can seek grants, they can make grants if we can get some federal funding appropriated into this new partnership, and they can go and do plans and projects. So the folks who work on remediating these trespass grow sites, including Murad from UC Davis, whose last name I'm forgetting. Murad Gabriel. They're very excited about this part of the bill. They think it'll be a very important way to move remediation forward.
And so I think my last comment, and this is, I hadn't heard this today, it's something that's we've addressed in NCRP. We've done some carbon mapping. In essence, with the little of effort that's gone on over the years, in essence, we're one big carbon sink.
When you're not on fire.
When we're not on fire, we're putting carbon out. We know private landowners, in fact, large timber landowners have benefited from, I believe, AB 32 in the carbon trade system. Long ago, when this was at the state level, and my colleagues at CSAC, what about those counties who really have a large portion of federal land? No one could figure out that puzzle, that riddle, in terms of how could we do increase some revenue through an AB 32 situation where you have land that isn't really being managed, and use that new funding source. We talk about thinking creatively to look at throwing it into a restoration, that footprint, to get that work done. or whatever, any other else in the county, since we have such a, in my opinion, a carbon sink if it's not on fire.
Well, I think the kind of projects that we're calling for in the special restoration area are the kind of projects you would do to maximize carbon sequestration. I mean, you're preserving the old growth trees, the larger diameter trees, you're reducing the risk of fire, so that's the negative side of your carbon footprint. So I think it fits very nicely. Whether it would qualify for AB 32 revenue, I don't know.
Well, at the moment, it doesn't. I mean, that would take a whole nother fix somewhere with the state and the feds. I know the state, there is an effort of the state trying to work with the country of Mexico, trying to do something there, but that's not moving forward, as you likely
But I guess I would also suggest that it's an area that is sort of perfect for a partnership with the state of California. And it's one of the reasons we're pointing towards stewardship contracting, because you could bring in state partners and other partners to do this work together under an agreed upon carbon management protocol.
And I know some companies have, did get some of the protocols they really wanted, and we would, I'm not sure it would pass the red face test that they were able to get, but they were able to raise quite a bit of revenue. I'm not suggesting those protocols would be applied here, but something creative might be a source of funding down the road. All right, so John, we need to get going. Yeah. Okay, so with that, Congressman, thank you. I think this really is a first sitting at the dais.
Oh, well, I hope it's not the last, and I want to thank you all for your time and for your thoughtfulness. You've all been, frankly, just perfectly collaborative to work with, and even the members of the audience who maybe, haven't shared my politics or have criticisms about the bill. It's been a really respectful conversation, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And if anyone send a question more to John, those who still have some follow-up questions,